Hi, it's Penny here, and in this video I wanted to share with you the 10 longest books that I've ever read, or at least books that I've read since I started using Goodreads. Although actually I've ended up ordering these by word count, and I got the word count from the Kobo store, so I think they're sometimes a little bit variable depending on things. But anyway, let's talk about the longest books, and also a little bit about whether I think for each of them whether them being that long was actually a good idea. So I'm going to start with the shortest book and move up to the longest book, although when I say the shortest book, this one is 300,000 words long. It's also not very representative of my reading taste, I don't think. So at number 10 we have Outlander by Diana Gabaldon. Now this is a time travel book, and I do like time travel, but it's also like more of a fantasy romance really, and I honestly wasn't even interested in this. However, a work colleague of mine knew that I liked reading, and so they lent me a couple of books. Oh, actually, they lent me 3 books, and one of them was a 7 Water series, which I did love. So 1 out of 3, I guess, because I didn't like the others. So anyway, Outlander is about this woman who basically falls through this portal into the past in Scotland. Like she goes through some magical rock or something. I've forgotten the details. And when she's there, she meets this man, and they have what is, in my opinion, an incredibly toxic relationship with a bunch of physical abuse in it, and apparently a lot of people find that attractive. I guess that's fine if that's what you like, but I hated the whole experience and it was a slog to get through. I will admit that when I finished the book, I was interested in what happened next, so I looked it up on Wikipedia. So glad I don't need to actually read that series to know what happened. I don't think I would have liked it. On Goodreads though, this has an average rating of 4.26. It's very well loved by a lot of people, but I think it was just a lot of toxic romance tropes and I didn't enjoy it at all. So moving on. At number 9 with 303,000 words, we have A Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon. I'm kind of using this. I don't own A Day of Fallen Night, but I do own this kind of worn edition of The Priory of the Orange Tree. So you can see, I think A Day of Fallen Night is just a little bit longer than this. It's a pretty chunky book. And I didn't really like A Priory of the Orange Tree, although I thought it had potential. I just think a lot of people raved about how great this was, that it was a standalone fantasy. I think it would have been a lot better broken down into a trilogy, because I think then it could have avoided the very heavy-handed world building at the beginning. The middle was actually the best part in my opinion, and then the ending was very disappointing in my opinion. We're not meant to be talking about A Priory of the Orange Tree though, we're meant to be talking about A Day of Fallen Night. But the thing is, it's kind of just the same story but set in the past. Now I do have a friend who told me they read A Day of Fallen Night first and then read The Priory of the Orange Tree, and they said that was actually quite satisfying because in some ways the Priory of the Orange Tree has like the conclusion that you would want from A Day of Fallen Night. So I would actually recommend, if you are going to pick up those books, pick them up that way. It probably does make more sense. And maybe I would have liked A Day of Fallen Night if I didn't feel like I was just rereading Priory. What is this book series about? Like these different people who have very different views of dragons and as a result are in conflict, but there's also kind of this evil dragon reappearing and causing a bunch of problems, and different characters kind of have to try and do something about that. Anyway, not a favorite book of mine, but the average rating on Goodreads is 4.36, so again, very high. So I guess I'm an unpopular opinion, but actually not that unpopular because I've seen a lot of people disliking it. I think maybe you either love it or hate it, depending on what you were looking for. Then at number 8, we have The First Binding by R.R. Verdi. And to be honest, I was very happy to see that the average rating for this book is now only 3.57. And that possibly sounds harsh, but the reason why I dislike this book is because, in my opinion, it is a complete ripoff of The Name of the Wind. Like, the plot is pretty much copied beat for beat. There are some interesting changes made to the mythology. I say changes because it still is very similar in a lot of ways. And there are also some differences in the main character, but not necessarily for the better. And I just couldn't get over how similar the plot was. So I'm kind of glad, even though I see a lot of people who haven't read The Name of the Wind really loving this, I'm glad that enough people rating it lower as I think it deserves, given how derivative it is. If I had to give you the plot summary, I'll probably just give you the plot summary of The Name of the Wind. We have a young boy who has gone through some tragic family circumstances and finds himself on the street. Then he eventually makes his way to the magical school where he learns the magic, performs some heroic feats. Oh, and the whole thing is actually being told by his future self, and you're wondering how he ended up where he is. Anyway, if you're at all interested in the first binding, I would recommend The Name of the Wind instead. Actually, The Name of the Wind is only 257,000 words, so significantly shorter, but actually much faster paced, and so has a lot more content, in my opinion. The first binding was quite slow, and when I realized how much of a ripoff of The Name of the Wind it was, I was incredibly frustrated that I had read so many pages. Then at number 7, we have The Gathering Storm by Kate Elliott. So this is 352,000 words. And again, a chunker. Does it look bigger than this? No, it doesn't. But I think the font is a lot smaller. Anyway, this is the 5th book in the Crown of Stars series, where all the books are also pretty big, although this is definitely the biggest one. I did actually, when putting together this list, only include one book from any series, and always, of course, the biggest one. So this is the biggest one. This is a series. I'm trying to think about what was actually happening in the beginning of this series. I guess it starts out following a couple of young people, one who has learnt this astronomy, maths type magic, even though magic is not really allowed in the religion of this world. And then another young boy who's an orphan, and there's questions about his parentage, and both of them kind of find themselves in the center of the kingdom, playing an important part in a bigger dark magic cataclysm. But of course, with books this thick, it builds out, and in the end you get a lot of different characters' perspectives, and a lot happens. I will say with this, the average rating on Goodreads is only 3.91, probably justified. The writing is sometimes a little bit hard to get through. It's just a little bit dense. But I still did really enjoy this series, and I think it was worth pushing through the denseness to get through the whole series, although that last book was a little bit disappointing. But book 5 actually, I've just remembered this was the most exciting book of the series, so definitely worth the length. Then at number 6, we have Fool's Fate by Robin Hobb. So this is book 3 in the Tawny Man trilogy. To be honest, I was a little bit surprised that this came out as the longest book in the realm of the Elderlings, but it's only just. So this is 359,000 pages. This one here, Assassin's Fate, which is the last book in the series, the last book in the Fitz and the Fool trilogy. This one is, according to the Kobo store, 358,000 pages. So only 1,000. Do I keep saying pages? I definitely mean words. Anyway, imagine reading a 158,000 page book. You'd die. But when I look at these two books, I would expect this one to be bigger in terms of word count. It's taller. What's the difference in the font size? Oh, this font size is tiny, whereas this one is kind of almost normal. So that'll be why. But anyway, I really love The Realm of the Elderlings. It is a 16-book series, I think, although it's broken up into smaller trilogies with one quartet. This one here is from the 3rd trilogy, where we follow our main character Fitz, who is the main character in the 1st, the 3rd, and the final trilogy of the series. So he is the bastard son of the king in waiting, and in the 1st trilogy he is trained to be an assassin. In the 2nd trilogy he's a little bit older, kind of gets pulled back into the politics of the kingdom, and also some dragon shenanigans. I especially love the dragons in this world and the way that they just think humans are completely inferior to them. I love it. Then at number 5, with 394,000 words, we have The Burning White by Brent Weeks. So this is the final book in a 5-book series. The series is actually called the Lightbringer series, although I always think of it as the Black Prism series. That's the first book in the series. And this is a series where there is color-based magic, so people are able to see different colors and convert them into magic. Some people can only do one color, other people can do multiple. But the Black Prism is kind of this religious figure who's able to use all the different colors, or the full spectrum of light. And I'm trying to think about, it's been a long time since I read the first book, so I'm never sure anymore what's spoilers. But we start out with the Black Prism. He seems somewhat unlikable, but there's more to him than meets the eye. And we also follow kind of some other characters who end up being involved in this big magical battle, as well as a political conspiracy. By the end of the series, this book. There is a lot happening. There were definitely some things in this series that didn't go in the direction I was hoping they would, but there were also some things that were really amazing and I love them. So overall, I really love this series. This has an average rating of 4.26, which I think is justified. I definitely had a good time with it. Then at 398,000 words, we have The Wise Man's Fear by Patrick Rothfuss. So this is the sequel to The Name of the Wind. And maybe these days you could also call it the last book in this series, because who knows if we'll ever get the actual last book in the trilogy, the third book. It's a mystery, but it kind of doesn't matter in some ways. Like, there is a lot of things that are going to happen in that last book that have been built up that I would love to read, but also the story so far is still pretty satisfying and I still think definitely worth reading. The average rating for this is 4.55, which is very high, so I think you can see this series is well loved. I have seen in more recent times some people not liking it. Admittedly, this was published in 2011, so it's getting old now. Actually, interestingly, the main criticism I see is the fairy sex, which is ironic considering how popular books with fairy sex in them are these days, right? Anyway, this one we continue to follow Quoth as he, continues his adventure. I do remember when I picked this up, I was a little bit surprised how long he spends at the university. I thought he would move on, but most of this, at least half of this, is set in the university. He does go some other places, learn some things. It's a really solid fantasy series. And even though part of me is very bitter and twisted about the lack of the third book, I still really love this, and I think it is worth the length. Maybe there's some bits that are a little bit more drawn out than they need to be, but there's some bits that are great, and Patrick Rothfuss's writing style really is something that's just nice to read. So it's hard to be mad when he goes on a bit too much in certain parts. Then at number 3, with 403,000 words, we have Lord of Chaos by Robert Jordan. So this is the 6th book in the Wheel of Time books. I actually struggle to remember what happened in this particular one. Is this the one where a certain character spends a lot of time in a box? Is that this one? Anyway, if you have heard my opinions of the Wheel of Time before, you will know that I don't really think they should be as long as they are. I think if the pace had been improved a lot, these books could have been great, but instead they are a slog. Not just the section that everyone calls the slog, but a little bit leaking around the edges in my opinion. But I'm kind of glad I read it so that I know what happened in this popular fantasy series and I get people's references about it and I can talk to people about it. But did I actually enjoy the series? Bits of it, but that's it. The average rating for this though is 4.19, so I guess a lot of people like it. I guess. Then at number 2 with 431,000 words, we have A Dance of Dragons by George R.R. Martin. So I read this so long ago now, I think more than 10 years ago. So I've kind of forgotten. What I do know is that this book took me at least 6 months, maybe longer, to read. Because at the time I read this, I wasn't reading as much. Also, at the time I read this, the main other fantasy series I was reading was the Sookie Stackhouse books, which are very different. And it's hard to say, I didn't feel like A Song of Ice and Fire was my favorite series. I liked it, but I found it at the time hard to get through, and I didn't feel necessarily very emotionally invested in what was happening. And I do wonder if I picked it up now, having read a lot more epic fantasy, whether I would enjoy it more or whether I would appreciate it more. We will not know until we get Winds of Winter, because I am not rereading the series until we get Winds of Winter. Because with The Name of the Wind, the Kingkiller Chronicles, I reread the series multiple times in anticipation of the third book. And I enjoyed my rereads, admittedly. So it wasn't necessarily time wasted, but it was still disappointing. So I'm not doing that with A Song of Ice and Fire, especially because I didn't love it as much the first time I read it. Also, is it A Dance of Dragons where there's a character introduced and then you read a significant part from their perspective and then it becomes very clear that they're not really important? Or at least I think it's fairly common for people to feel like having read that perspective was a complete waste of their time. Is that A Dance of Dragons? I think it might have been, in which case you could have just deleted that whole bit, George, and the book would have been a lot shorter. So I think this is one where I probably think it didn't need to be as long as it was. But I guess also if he had spent more time editing it down to be shorter, maybe we never would have gotten it, so beggars can't be choosers. Okay, then the longest book that I have read with 458,000 words is Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson, which I only read last month. Although I think When in Truth, coming out next month, will be even longer. So at that point, this will be bumped off the list. So Rhythm of War is the 4th book in the Stormlight Archives, which is an epic fantasy about... It's always hard with epic fantasies like this to even start to describe them. And actually, I didn't even try and explain A Song of Ice and Fire to you. I just assumed everyone knows. And I can probably assume if you have an interest in long epic fantasy books, you probably already know what this book is about. So actually, I'm not even going to try. And I will admit also that I felt like some parts of this could have been edited out or made a little bit shorter. I did think the plot dragged a little bit in the beginning. However, even the boring bits probably did feed into the excitement and the intensity at the end. Like, there was a lot of payoff in the end. So maybe the length is justified. And like, I'm super excited about the 5th book, so obviously I love this. And I'm not alone. It has an average rating of 4.62, which I think, if I look at my list, is the highest average rating of all these long books that I've talked about. So probably justified in being as long as it is. Anyway, those are the longest books that I've read. Let me know if you think you've read something longer. And also let me know, do you enjoy long books? I assume if you're here, you do. But let me know down in the comments. Let's chat. Do subscribe if you'd like to see more of my bookish videos. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.